then in South Carolina, where the family of the gunman who killed 9 people inside a Charleston church is reaching out to the victims. Dylann Roof's family releasing a statement late yesterday that reads, in part, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends of those killed this week. We have all been touched by the moving words from the victims' families, offering God's forgiveness and love in the face of such horrible suffering." That forgiveness came during Dylann Roof's first court appearance yesterday, an appearance in which the victims' loved ones could address Roof directly through a video conference link. Roof was formally charged with 9 counts of murder, also a weapons charge. NBC News' Mark Potter has spoken to one of Dylann Roof's friends. He joins us now from Charleston. Mark, so what did you find out?
Well, I found out in talking to actually several of his friends that there are mixed feelings about him. You get mixed accounts. The one that you're referring to is a young man named Christian Scriven, who is 20 years old. He's African-American, and he says that he was a friend of Dylann Roof, and he makes the point that he does not think that he was a racist, that he had black friends. Others, however, have said that they heard him make racist comments and talk about the separation of races. So those are some of the differences that we're hearing about. But this young man, Mr. Scriven, did say that he became wary of Dylann Roof at some point after Roof bought a handgun in April. And he talked about a night when they were driving around when Roof predicted or announced that he was going to go shoot up a local college. And let's hear a little bit from that conversation.
We were all out here drinking one night, and he said that he was going to the college to shoot the college up.
When you heard that he had been implicated in the shooting at the church, what did you think?
That he was serious, and he really actually went and did all this stuff that he said he was going to do, and he wasn't joking.
And Scriven said what was really interesting about that and tragic about that is that this occurred a week ago and a half ago on a Wednesday, and that Roof predicted that he was going to do this or announced he was going to do the shooting at the college the next Wednesday. That Wednesday was the day that he went and fired into the church and killed the 9 people, according to authorities. And that's what shook everybody up, that there was warning. And so one of the moms of one of the friends told me yesterday that the moral of this story is that people who hear these sort of statements being made, who hear threatening statements, need to take responsibility and report that to someone who can do something about it. And she said, unfortunately, this was something that maybe could have been prevented. Nobody believed him. They didn't think he was serious. They didn't think it could actually happen. They were concerned enough to remove his gun from him one night when people had been drinking, but he got it back. And then, you know, as fate would have it, he was involved in this horrible tragedy here in Charleston. And so people are saying we got to pay attention when we get word that something like this might be up. Any indication needs to be investigated.
All right, NBC's Mark Potter in South Carolina. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Now, on All In with Chris Hayes last night, South Carolina Republican state representative named Doug Brannon said that he plans to introduce legislation to remove the Confederate flag from the South Carolina state capitol once and for all. Take a listen.
I had a friend die Wednesday night for no reason other than he was a black man. Senator Pinckney was an incredible human being. I don't want to talk politics, but I'm going to introduce the bill for that reason. I'm not a politician tonight, but I do have access, and I will introduce that bill in December. I will pre-file that bill in December before we go back into session.
Again, that's State Representative Doug Brannon in South Carolina saying that he will introduce a bill in December when the legislature is back in session to remove the flag from the State House grounds in South Carolina. Meanwhile, controversial sight still flying above the South Carolina State Capitol this morning. The American flag and the South Carolina state flag flying at half-staff outside the State House in Columbia, but the Confederate flag flying nearby, not at half-staff. Governor Nikki Haley directing the flags she could to remain at half-staff for 9 days to honor each of the 9 victims. But the South Carolina General Assembly needs to sign off on any movement of the Confederate flag. A spokesman for President Obama saying yesterday that the president believes the Confederate flag belongs in a museum, a position Obama himself stated in 2007 before he became president. Jon Stewart adding his thoughts on Thursday night's Daily Show.
9 people were shot in a black church by a white guy who hated them, who wanted to start some kind of civil war. The Confederate flag flies over South Carolina, and the roads are named for Confederate generals. And the white guy's the one who feels like his country's being taken away from him.
And joining us now, Jamelle Bouie, staff writer at Slate, and former Congressman Ben Jones, a Democrat from Georgia, who's also an actor on the show The Dukes of Hazzard. And Congressman Jones, let me start with you. I know your position, at least in the past on this issue, has been that you favor retaining the Confederate flag as a symbol of heritage. I'm wondering if, excuse me, if in the wake of the events this week, and in the wake of what you heard from Doug Brandon, for instance, in South Carolina, has that changed your thinking on this issue at all?
Not really. It's such and far more nuanced and complex than that to me, Steve. I'm glad that the representative is bringing this thing. That discussion is needed, and it needs to be a sober and thoughtful and compassionate bridge-building conversation among Southerners, black and white, of good hearts and caring and sensitivity to each other. And I'm glad it's coming up in December. We shouldn't be having this fight right now. I don't think we should be making any of these hot political issues in the aftermath of this terrible, unspeakable tragedy. This was a disturbed young man who wanted to make a name for himself. I think he'd been drugging a lot. He got online with all these white supremacist websites and things. Their flag is the American flag, the Klan and all those people. That's their official flag. And when they use the symbol of the Confederate battle flag, they desecrate it, in my opinion. I've spent my life in the South fighting for civil rights for everybody and understanding between the races. And I won't stop doing that. But there's 70 million Americans who are also descended from the Confederacy. And many of us see it in a much different context. We don't like it being used in those ways. The flag was taken down, and I've seen reporting this week that says the stars and bars flies atop the Capitol in South Carolina. It doesn't. It's not the stars and bars, by the way, which was the first official flag of the Confederacy states, the government flag. The battle flag is the Confederate battle flag. The St. Andrew's Cross is what we're talking about. And it's a symbol that means different things to different people in different contexts. And we must be sensitive to everybody's feelings about it and understand that. To us, it means something very different. Let me just finish quickly, if I may, Steve, and to say, and it now flies on the grounds. That will be taken up soberly and thoughtfully in December by the South Carolina legislature. But it is not the flag that caused this act. We must make that clear. And as a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, everybody in my family fought for the South.
I want to get Jamelle Bouie in here to respond to that. Jamelle, first, let me just to put some context to this. I also want to include some polling numbers here that I think might surprise some people. American opinions on the Confederate flag. This is it's an online survey conducted by SurveyMonkey. This is a fairly reputable way of collecting data. It says 49% see it as a symbol of racism, 49% as a symbol of Southern pride. So sort of a split right down the middle, at least according to this. So Jamelle, Ben Jones there is basically making the heritage argument. He's saying 70 million Americans trace their ancestry through the Confederacy. This means something important to them. What's your response to what you just heard?
You know, films and books and movies can have multiple interpretations, but I think historical symbols, and I think particularly standards for armies, their meanings are rooted in the histories behind them. The Confederacy was founded on the basis of the preservation and expansion of slavery. The Confederate Army fought to defend those ideals, and while I have, I have no problem, and I, in some ways, respect people and honor their ancestors and their valor. we can't actually just erase history. The history of the Confederate battle flag is part of the history of the Confederacy, and the history of the Confederacy is a movement, a political movement to preserve slavery. That flag, the battle flag and the Confederate flag, the flag of the CSA itself, went into hibernation for quite a while. The two times when it came back out of hibernation and back into public view were during Reconstruction, when anti-Reconstruction ex-Confederates used terrorism to try to disenfranchise newly enfranchised blacks, and during the Civil Rights Movement, when opponents of integration and supporters of Jim Crow brought the flag back out to show their opposition to civil rights. In the flag's position in the South Carolina Capitol, for example, only shows up in 1962. Now, it's possible that it showed up because in 1962 a group of white South Carolinians just wanted to show their heritage, but my sense is that it's there as a symbol of defiance. Now, on Wednesday, 9 people were killed by a young man who was steeped in white supremacist imagery, who had the flags of apartheid states on his clothing, who had Confederate symbols on his vehicle, who expressed his desire to start a race war, who talked about black people in the same exact terms as Confederate leaders did. Regardless of whether or not something is your heritage, you feel free to honor your heritage however you like in your private space, but the South Carolina Capitol is a public space, and it is insulting, frankly, to have that flag fly when 9 people were killed by a person expressing the ideals that flag flew for 150 years ago, 100 years ago, and 50 years ago.
So Ben Jones, I get you maybe to respond to that. So the idea that you cannot, ultimately at a certain level, the Confederate flag and slavery, they're inseparable. And you could talk about the descendants of the Confederacy. There are the descendants of slavery in South Carolina. And ultimately, how can a state honor a symbol that means slavery to descendants of slaves?
Well, I've always had a problem with its state use of any symbol. You know, the American flag, slavery, was brought here in 1619. The American flag flew over slavery in every state in the early unions and in all the colonies, which became states. There was slavery there. Slavery was a northern enterprise, really. It built Wall Street. It built American capitalism. The profits went north, the cotton went north to the mills. And so it's a more complex issue to us. I remember Lincoln's first inaugural address where he said that slavery is constitutionally protected. I won't touch it, and suggested that the Corwin Amendment, which had been passed in the Buchanan administration, be supported, which would have protected slavery for perpetually. So that's where Lincoln was in his first inaugural address, and a year and a half later, he says to Horace Greeley, "Greeley, if I could save the Union with slavery, I would do it. If I could save it without slavery, I would do that too. It's about union." So the slavery issue was a horrible thing, horrible, but it's the American sin, not the Southern sin. With the government thing, I'm not sure. I think, it should have been taken down from the top of the Capitol, and it was placed as a memorial to the Confederacy. And next to it, I think should be, if we're going to do anything on state grounds, there should be a memorial to those who suffered in slavery. When Dr. King said, let us, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners sit together. That was his dream, to sit together at the table of brotherhood. These horrible incidents like this inflame these passions again. The Confederate flags aren't going to disappear. They simply aren't. And those of us who honor our ancestors understand why they did what they did in their time. But to blame slavery on the South is I think, a historical canard.
All right, we're short on time, but Jamel, I want to get you in for the last word here, just to go ahead and respond to what you just heard.
Okay, so two things. First, it's absolutely true the American flag flew over slavery. The American flag, the symbol of the United States, also has multiple other meanings. The United States, at its best, is a country dedicated to the ideal that all men are created equal, that representative government is the way we ought to run our country. The Confederacy does not have that dual meaning. The Confederacy, as expressed by Alexander Stephens, as expressed by Jefferson Davis, as expressed by every single state that seceded from the Union, was founded in defense and preservation and expansion of slavery. The second thing, it's also true that slavery wasn't a Southern innovation. It's certainly true that slavery profited the entire nation, but that is a separate issue than the states that left the United States to preserve that institution. It's sort of a little disingenuous to bring that up to say that, well, the Confederate flag doesn't mean that. No, it does. This is what the history is. And again, people can honor their ancestors however they would like in their homes, in their communities, but the idea that we have to give public sanction to it, the idea that black Southerners like myself have to consent to this symbol being flown on public land, I think is ridiculous. We wouldn't do that for any other symbol like the Confederate flag, and so I don't see why we ought to do that for the Confederate flag, unless I guess we want to start flying all sorts of crazy symbols.
All right, Jamel Bowie from Slate, former Congressman Ben Jones from Georgia. I appreciate both of you joining us. I really appreciated that conversation we just had there.